Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a typical workday. You log into your computer, maybe access some really sensitive files, perhaps connect to your company's deeply secured network.
Mm-hmm.
You trust your device, right? I mean, you have to.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you really know that trust isn't misplaced? What if, before you even typed your password or used your fingerprint, something unseen, something kind of malicious, had already silently infiltrated your system,
Right.
like a hidden saboteur, deeply embedded, just patiently waiting? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the silent guardian that, well, stands watch over your digital life, the secret, super secure vault inside your device, the Trusted Platform Module, or TPM.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here, and I think often underappreciated, is how the TPM doesn't just add another layer of security. It represents a fundamental paradigm shift in cybersecurity. For decades, our defenses primarily relied on, what the operating system and software applications could do.
Antivirus, firewalls, that sort of thing.
Exactly. We'd install antivirus, set up firewalls, cross our fingers, and hope for the best. But as threats evolved, burrowing deeper and deeper into the very foundations of our hardware, that purely software-based approach, well, it simply wasn't enough anymore.
It hit a wall.
It just really did.
Yeah.
The TPM ushers in a new era, anchoring our digital trust in the immutable, verifiable realm of hardware. It's not software you install, not an app you update. It's a physical component, or sometimes a deeply integrated firmware designed specifically to provide a hardware root of trust. It aims to make your entire device inherently more trustworthy from the very moment it powers on.
That's a huge shift, yeah, and a real game changer. So our mission today, our deep dive, is to explore exactly what this TPM is, why it's become such an absolutely crucial component in today's, let's face it, increasingly treacherous digital landscape, and how it works silently, diligently behind the scenes, often without us even realizing it's there. We'll examine its real-world applications, some you might be using every single day without knowing it, its undeniable strengths, its perhaps surprising vulnerabilities, and what the future holds for this silent security hero as we navigate a world of, well, quantum computing and ever smarter AI. And here's the kicker for you, our listener. If you're using almost any modern PC today, especially one running Windows 11, a TPM is likely already protecting your device right now.
That's right, very likely.
So understanding it isn't just about, technical jargon. It's about appreciating the unseen layers, safeguarding your most sensitive data and identity, empowering you to make more informed decisions about your own digital security. So let's start with the absolute essentials. We've thrown the term around, but what is a trusted platform module in, practical terms?
Okay, so at its core, a Trusted Platform Module, or TPM, is a specialized, secure crypto processor. You should think of it less like your main CPU, the brains of the operation, and more like a highly fortified, tiny, super secure vault. Or maybe a locked safe.
A vault inside the computer.
Exactly. This vault is integrated directly into the hardware of modern computers, laptops, servers, and increasingly, even embedded devices like in cars or factory equipment. Its entire purpose, its reason for being, is to protect your most sensitive digital treasures. We're talking cryptographic keys, those incredibly complex digital codes that encrypt your data, passwords, digital certificates, other critical secrets. It shields them from the prying eyes of software-based attacks, the kind that might try to steal them from your main memory or your hard drive while the system's running.
And it's really vital to emphasize it's hardware, right? Not just software you download, because that distinction seems fundamental to its security.
Absolutely. That is the fundamental difference. You've nailed it. It's a physical component, often a tiny dedicated chip soldered right onto your motherboard, or sometimes it's securely integrated directly into your processor's architecture, like you find with modern chips from Intel, AMD, or Qualcomm.
Right.
It operates as a self-contained, self-sufficient unit. It receives commands from the system, performs secure operations like encryption or signing, and then returns the results. But crucially, it doesn't independently alter your system's execution path.
It doesn't run the show.
No, it just provides secure services. This physical and logical isolation makes it extraordinarily robust against compromise, far, far more resilient than any security solution relying purely on software, which, can often be easily circumvented or modified by sophisticated malware. So in simple terms, it provides three critical functions. One, it securely stores sensitive data like encryption keys. Two, it verifies your system integrity, making sure nothing's been tampered with, especially during boot up. And three, it protects your identity and data during sensitive operations.
Like logging in.
Exactly. Take Windows. Hello, for instance. When you log in with your face or your fingerprint, The TPM is quietly working behind the scenes, ensuring that your biometric data, the template, and the entire authentication process are securely handled, never leaving the safety of the chip. It's processed right there.
That brings us directly to why we need this hardware guardian. You mentioned earlier, for decades, cybersecurity was mostly about the OS and apps. We had our antivirus, our firewalls.
Right, the traditional stuff.
Yeah, the security patches. But then, as you said, the adversaries got smarter, more sophisticated. They started digging deeper.
Precisely. The threat landscape shifted dramatically. Traditional cybersecurity tools were really designed to combat malware operating within those visible layers of the OS. But attackers developed these incredibly insidious techniques, giving rise to what we now call firmware rootkits.
Firmware rootkits. Sounds nasty.
They are. These aren't your typical viruses that infect your Word documents or your browser. These are deeply embedded threats that burrow into the Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, the UEFI, or the older BIOS, the absolute foundational code that starts your computer before Windows or Linux even begins to load.
Wow, okay.
This level of infection makes them virtually invisible to typical endpoint security tools, which, operate at a higher level. And the most terrifying part, they persist across reboots, operating system reinstalls, even if you completely wipe and replace your hard drive.
Seriously, even a new drive.
Even a new drive. Because they live in the firmware below the drive, they can effectively reinfect your clean system every single time it boots up. This exposed a fundamental, glaring weakness in a security model that relied solely on software to defend against threats that operate beneath the software itself.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a bit chilling. Imagine moving into a brand new house. You clean it top to bottom, maybe even replace all the furniture. But there's like a squatter living inside the basement walls that you can't see, you can't evict, and who just reappears in your living room every morning after you've supposedly cleaned everything.
That's a pretty good analogy, actually, yeah.
That's what a firmware rootkit is to your system, right? A truly persistent, invisible threat. And it just highlights why software alone, no matter how good, just isn't enough to secure that foundation. So the solution had to be something fundamentally different, something called a hardware root of trust.
That's the crucial pivot, exactly. The concept of a hardware root of trust, or HROT, emerged specifically to counter these deep-seated persistent threats. And HROT is, by definition, an inherently trusted, immutable meaning unchangeable, and tamper-resistant component. It serves as the bedrock, the absolute anchor for all subsequent security validations. It's the one thing you must be able to trust to verify everything else.
The starting point.
The starting point of trust. And the TPM is the most widely adopted and prominent example of an HROT today. It provides that unshakable, trustworthy foundation right at the hardware level. It gives you a verifiable starting point for security, something you can build upon.
This sounds like really cutting-edge stuff, but
yeah.
When did this idea of the TPM actually start? Was it recent?
Conceptually, its origins actually trace back quite a way to the early 2000s. It was spurred by initiatives like Microsoft's ambitious next-generation secure computing base, originally codenamed Palladium.
Palladium, I remember that name.
Yeah, it caused quite a stir. That project explored ways to provide enhanced security and privacy for Windows, and although Palladium itself didn't fully launch as planned, it directly led to the formation of the Trusted Computing Group, or TCG, in 2003.
Okay, the TCG.
Right. This is an industry consortium bringing together hardware and software companies that developed the vendor-neutral TPM standard. This standard was later adopted internationally as ISO AES 11-1889. We saw initial implementations, TPM 1.1, then 1.2, which were good steps. But the really significant architectural shift, a true leap forward, came with TPM 2.0, introduced around 2014.
2.0. That's the one we hear about now.
That's the one. It brought a host of improvements, most notably something called algorithm agility, the ability to use newer, stronger encryption methods, and just generally greater flexibility.
And speaking of significance, we absolutely cannot skip over Microsoft's decision with Windows 11. That really pushed TPMs into the mainstream consciousness for millions of regular users, didn't it?
Oh, entirely. It was a monumental moment for hardware security. Microsoft made TPM 2.0 a mandatory hardware requirement for installing Windows 11. Now, this wasn't just, a technical spec for a new OS update. It was a strategic, industry-shaping move. It aimed to standardize and, frankly, democratize hardware-backed security on a global scale.
Raising the baseline for everyone.
Precisely. This decision cemented the TPM's transition from being primarily an enterprise-focused feature largely unknown or ignored by consumers, to a standard expected component for millions of consumer devices worldwide. If you connect this to the bigger picture, Microsoft's move significantly elevated the global security baseline for personal computing. It made it substantially harder for large-scale cyber attacks, particularly those nasty boot-level attacks, to gain a widespread foothold. It essentially forced manufacturers and users alike to adopt a more robust security posture by default. It basically raised the bar for what a secure PC truly means in the modern era.
All right, so we've established what a TPM is and why it's so vital, especially with these, evolving firmware threats. Now let's really pull back the curtain and explore how this incredible little chip actually does all this stuff. First up, secure storage for keys and secrets. How does this tiny vault keep our most sensitive digital information safe?
Right, so the TPM achieves this through dedicated hardware isolation. It possesses a special, physically isolated, and critically tamper-resistant area within its non-volatile memory, or NVM. Think of it as a secure partition inside the chip itself.
Okay, protected memory.
Exactly. This area is exclusively for cryptographic keys like RSA keys for signing, ECC keys, which are more modern, SHA-256 hash capabilities, along with other sensitive data like digital certificates or maybe those biometric templates we mentioned for Windows.
Oh.
This physical separation and the inherent tamper resistance make it exponentially harder for attackers, even sophisticated ones, to steal these keys compared to storing them in software or even just in the main system RAM, where malware could potentially lurk and compromise them.
Makes sense.
It's truly a secure, internal safe that's incredibly difficult to crack open, especially compared to just leaving valuables out on the table, which is kind of like software storage.
And I remember you mentioned a master key involved in all this, the storage root key. How does that specific key fit into the picture?
Ah, yes, the storage root key, or SRK. It's absolutely foundational to how the TPM protects other keys. It's a unique master key pair, a public and a private part, that the TPM itself generates internally when a user or an administrator takes ownership of the TPM for the first time.
Taking ownership, okay.
Right. The SRK's primary role is to encrypt, or as the TCG calls it, wrap, all other keys and sensitive data that get stored inside the TPM. The private portion of this SRK is meticulously protected by the TPM's hardware security mechanisms and, critically, never leaves the confines of the chip. Ever.
Yep. Never leaves. Got it.
This wrapping mechanism ensures that even if an attacker somehow manages to compromise the operating system completely, they still can't easily access the multitude of other keys protected by the SRK inside the TPM. A perfect real-world example is when you encrypt your hard drive with BitLocker on Windows.
Yeah, I use that.
So the TPM stores that BitLocker encryption key, the one that actually unlocks your drive. But that key itself is wrapped, encrypted by the SRK. So if your laptop is stolen, even if someone physically removes the hard drive and puts it in another machine, your data remains inaccessible because they don't have your TPM, and more specifically, they don't have the SRK needed to unwrap the BitLocker key.
Okay, that's clever. So it's not just passively storing keys. The TPM is actively using them for cryptographic operations, too. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Exactly right. The TPM isn't just a safe deposit box, it's also a secure processor. It performs critical cryptographic tasks like encrypting data, decrypting data, generating digital signatures, and verifying signatures directly on the chip itself.
On the chip?
On the chip. This on-chip processing is a critical security measure because it keeps these highly sensitive operations and private keys involved in them completely out of the main system memory and away from the general-purpose CPU. Those areas are far more susceptible to observation or manipulation by malicious software snooping around. By isolating these processes, the TPM creates a secure, dedicated execution environment for your most vulnerable cryptographic calculations.
And TPM 2.0 brought some really significant improvements here, didn't it, compared to the older versions?
It did indeed. A major advancement in TPM 2.0 is its concept of algorithm agility. Now, unlike its predecessor, TPM 1.2, which is often kind of fixed to older algorithms like SHA-1, which is now considered broken for many uses.
Right, SHA-1 is bad news now.
Exactly. TPM 2.0 boasts a comprehensive library of robust and modern cryptographic algorithms. This includes strong hash functions like SHA-256, powerful asymmetric encryption algorithms like RSA with 2048-bit keys or even stronger, and elliptic curve cryptography, ECC, which is more efficient, plus symmetric encryption like AES. This flexibility makes TPM 2.0 far more future-proof. It allows it to adapt as new cryptographic standards emerge or or, critically, as older ones inevitably become vulnerable to advancing computational power.
It's like quantum computers eventually.
Precisely. This agility will be absolutely paramount as we look towards the age of quantum computing. It allows the TPM framework to potentially integrate quantum-resistant algorithms once they become standardized. Furthermore, for creating strong, unpredictable cryptographic keys, which is foundational to any strong encryption, the TPM has a built-in hardware-based random number generator, or RNG.
Hardware-based RNG.
Yes, this ensures a true source of randomness, based on physical processes within the chip, making the keys it generates incredibly difficult to guess or predict, compared to software-based RNGs, which can sometimes be flawed or predictable.
That's a lot about securely handling keys.
Yeah.
But what about ensuring the system itself hasn't been tampered with? You mentioned this earlier. That's where platform integrity checking comes in, with something you called the chain of trust. How does that actually work? It sounds intriguing.
The chain of trust is one of the TPM's most ingenious and fundamental mechanisms. It's built upon a process called measured boot. During the system's startup, the TPM doesn't just check if something is signed by a trusted authority. It actively measures and stores hashes. Now think of a hash as a unique, fixed-size, unalterable digital fingerprint of every single system component.
Like a fingerprint for software.
Exactly, a fingerprint for code. From the very first piece of firmware that runs, through the bootloader, the operating system kernel, even critical drivers, as each one loads, its fingerprint is taken. This whole process begins with something called the core root of trust for measurement, or CRTM. This is a small, immutable piece of code within the system's firmware, typically in the BIOS or UEFI, that's implicitly trusted because it cannot be changed. It kicks off this entire measurement process.
So it's constantly taking these digital snapshots, these fingerprints, right from the very first breath the computer takes when you press the power button.
Precisely, right from the start. And these hash values, these digital fingerprints, they aren't just stored anywhere randomly. They are specifically stored in special memory registers inside the TPM called Platform Configuration Registers, or PCRs.
PCR.
Now, PCRs have a unique, profoundly important property. They are extend-only. What this means is that when a new component is measured, its hash isn't just, added to a list or overwriting the old value. Instead, the TPM takes the current value stored in a specific PCR, cryptographically combines it or extends it with the new measurement's hash using a secure hash function like SHA-256, and then stores the resulting combined hash back into that same PCR.
So it's like mixing paint. You keep adding colors, and the final color depends on everything you added, but you can't take a color back out.
That's a great analogy. It's like a digital blender that never gets emptied. Each new ingredient, each component's hash, changes the final blend in the PCR, but you can't unblend it to hide a past ingredient. The formula is essentially PCR new equals SHA-256 PC rolled new measurement. This creates an unalterable chronological log, a cryptographic chain of trust of the entire boot sequence. If even one tiny change is made to an early component, like malicious code injected into the bootloader, its hash will be different. That different hash gets extended into the PCR, and all subsequent PCR values derived from it will also be completely different. It leaves an indelible, instantly detectable mark.
It's like a tamper-evident digital logbook, then, one that can only add new entries, never erase or alter previous ones. So if someone tries to sneak in a malicious change anywhere in that boot chain, it leaves an indelible mark, a corrupted blend in those PCRs. Now, this sounds a bit like secure boot, which I know is supposed to prevent untrusted software from loading in the first place, but you're saying measured boot is different. How so?
That's a really crucial distinction, and yeah, it's where many people get confused. They sound similar, but they do different things. Secure boot is primarily a UEFI firmware feature. Its job is to prevent untrusted software from loading by verifying digital signatures of boot components against a database of trusted certificates stored in the UEFI firmware itself.
So it checks the ID at the door.
Exactly. If a component's signature isn't recognized or is invalid, the system simply won't boot it. It's a preventative measure. Measured boot, on the other hand, is fundamentally a TPM feature. It records those cryptographic measurements, those fingerprints, into the PCRs, creating that detailed, unalterable audit trail we just discussed. It doesn't necessarily prevent bad software from running initially, but it detects if something unexpected or untrusted did run, or if a trusted component was altered. It provides the evidence. This allows subsequent software, or more powerfully, a remote server doing an attestation check, to act on that information.
Okay, so if secure boot is like a bouncer at the club door, only letting in people with the right ID and invitation, Measured boot is like a meticulous security guard inside, documenting absolutely everyone who walks through, taking their picture, noting the time, just in case something goes wrong later. It provides the evidence of a breach, even if the bouncer missed something.
An excellent analogy, truly. Secure boot stops the known bad guys at the door. Measured boot tells you if anything unexpected happened inside, even if it wasn't on the block list. And this integrity checking becomes profoundly powerful when you combine it with another TPM feature called key sealing.
Key sealing. Okay, what's that?
Key sealing allows cryptographic keys stored in the TPM to be cryptographically sealed to specific PCR values. To really grasp this, consider it like this. Imagine your car key only works if it's placed in your specific car's ignition, and D, only if that car's engine and critical systems are in a healthy, untampered state, exactly as they left the factory. If someone swaps out the engine overnight or messes with the car's computer, your original key suddenly becomes useless for starting that car, even though it's still your key in your car. Similarly, a sealed encryption key, like the one for BitLocker, is cryptographically tied by the TPM to the exact fingerprint of your system's boot sequence, as captured in those PCRs at the time the key was sealed.
Tied to the state of the system.
Exactly. If even a single boot component is altered later, say a malicious firmware update gets installed or an unauthorized bootloader is introduced, that system fingerprint recorded in the PCRs changes. The TPM detects this mismatch between the current PCR values and the values they were sealed to, and crucially, it refuses to unseal or release the key. It effectively locks your data down, even if an attacker has physical access to your hard drive, because the system state isn't trusted anymore.
Wow. Okay, so the TPM can securely store keys, perform crypto operations on them, and verify its own system integrity, all in this highly protected little hardware vault. But how does it prove that integrity to someone else? Like, say, a remote server trying to decide if my laptop is trustworthy enough to connect to the corporate network. This must bring us to attestation and identity verification.
Yes, and this raises an absolutely critical question that's foundational to modern network security, especially zero-trust models. How do you trust a device you can't physically see, a device that could be anywhere in the world, potentially compromised? Remote attestation, enabled by the TPM, is the answer.
Okay, how does that work?
It starts with the TPM's unique identity. Every TPM chip has a unique secret RSA key pair called the endorsement key, or EK, which is permanently burned in during the manufacturing process and cannot be changed.
Burned in, like a serial number, but cryptographic.
Exactly. The private part of the EK is meticulously protected and never leaves the chip. This EK uniquely identifies that specific TPM module as genuine. It's like the device's unforgeable birth certificate, proving its authentic hardware identity, usually accompanied by a certificate from the manufacturer saying, yes, we made this chip and this is its public EK.
Okay, so the EK proves the TPM chip itself is legitimate. But what about proving the system it's part of is real and, more importantly, untampered?
Right, the EK proves the TPM is real, but not necessarily that the software running on the machine is trustworthy. For that, we rely on another type of key pair called an attestation identity key, or AIK. An AIK is also generated by the TPM, but unlike the EK, you can create multiple AIKs. These AIKs are used specifically to sign quotes.
Quotes, like quotation marks.
No, not quite. Think of a quote as a cryptographically signed statement or report from the TPM. This report contains the current values of selected PCRs, those fingerprints of the boot process, and often includes a nonce, a random number provided by the challenger, to prevent replay attacks.
Okay, so it's a signed snapshot of the system state.
Precisely. When a device needs to prove its legitimacy and untampered state to a remote party, like that corporate server, the server first challenges the device with a nonce. The device's TPM then generates a quote containing the current PCR values and the nonce, and signs this entire package with the private part of an AIK.
And the AIK's legitimacy traces back to the EK somehow.
Yes. Typically, the AIK's public key is certified by the TPM itself, using a process that involves the EK, proving that the AIK belongs to that specific genuine TPM. The device then sends this signed quote back to the remote server. The server verifies the signature using the AIK's public key and its certificate chain eventually linking back to the trusted manufacturer via the EK. Then, crucially, the server compares the PCR values reported in the quote to a known good, trusted configuration or policy, a golden measurement baseline.
So it checks that the fingerprint matches the expected fingerprint.
Exactly. If the PCR values match the expected baseline for a healthy, compliant system, the server can be highly confident that the device is running a legitimate, untainted OS with its security features intact, and only then does it grant access. This entire process is remote attestation. It's absolutely foundational for zero-trust security models in enterprise and cloud environments, where you don't automatically trust anything, and continuous verification is paramount. That VPN connection example. That's often exactly how it works behind the scenes to ensure your laptop is safe before letting you access sensitive internal resources.
Okay, that was an incredibly deep dive into the technical workings of TPMs. It's clear they're complex and seriously powerful.
Mm.
But you hinted earlier that not all TPMs are created equal, right? There are different ways they're actually implemented in devices. Let's talk about those differences.
You're absolutely right. There are critical distinctions in how TPMs are physically or virtually integrated into devices. Each approach has its own trade-offs, mainly around cost, performance, and the ultimate level of security assurance. The Trusted Computing Group actually defines several main types. First, we have the discrete TPMs.
Discrete, meaning separate.
Exactly. These are dedicated physical chips, totally separate components, often soldered directly onto the motherboard. They're made by specialized semiconductor companies like Infineon or STMicroelectronics. These generally represent the gold standard for hardware security. Why? Because they're designed, built, and rigorously evaluated specifically to be highly tamper-resistant, often achieving stringent physical security certifications like FIPS 140-2 Level 2 or Common Criteria EAL4 plus OKI.
FIPS and common criteria. Okay, those are serious security standards.
Very serious. Their strength comes from their complete physical isolation and dedicated hardware resources, separate from the main CPU. If you imagine securing something really critical, like an industrial control system for a power plant, or maybe the braking controller in an autonomous vehicle, that's where this level of robust, isolated physical resistance is absolutely paramount.
So discrete chips are basically the Fort Knox of TPMs. Makes sense for high-stakes stuff. What about the other options, the ones we're more likely to find in, say, our everyday laptops?
Right. Those are usually firmware TPMs, often abbreviated as FTPMs. These are essentially software-based TPMs, but they run within a special, protected, isolated area inside the main CPU itself, known as a Trusted Execution Environment, or TE.
Like Intel SGX or AMD Secure Processor?
Exactly those kinds of environments. Intel PTT, Platform Trust Technology, and AMD FTPM are the common brand names you'll see listed in specs for most modern consumer laptops and desktops. This approach is highly cost-effective for manufacturers because it eliminates the need for that separate physical chip and the extra space on the motherboard.
Cheaper, but still secure.
Yes, it still provides a significant security uplift by isolating those critical TPM functions from the main operating system running on the CPU cores. However, while generally considered very secure for most purposes, they do rely on the security features and the correct implementation of the general-purpose CPU's TE. This can introduce a slightly larger potential attack surface compared to a fully discrete, physically separate chip. Think of it like having a safe inside your house, FDPM, versus a separate vault building next door, discrete TPM. Both are secure, but the separate building is arguably harder to compromise indirectly.
Gotcha. And I've heard about something called Microsoft Pluton recently. How does that fit into this picture? Is that just another FTPM?
Pluton. That brings us nicely to integrated TPMs, which you can think of as a step beyond typical FTPMs in terms of, well, integration. Microsoft's Pluton security processor is a really notable and very forward-looking example here. With Pluton, the TPM functionality is embedded directly into the CPU silicon, similar to an FTPM, but with an even deeper level of hardware integration and, critically, a different architectural approach designed by Microsoft in collaboration with chip makers like Intel, AMD, and Qualcomm.
Deeper integration. How so?
Pluton's main design goal is to create a direct hardware root of trust right in the silicon that's always up to date via secure Windows updates, and crucially, to reduce the attack surface by eliminating the physical communication bus, often an SPI bus, that typically connects a separate discrete TPM or even some FTPM implementations to the CPU. Historically, that bus itself has been a potential vector for sophisticated physical attack.
So removing a pathway for attackers.
Precisely. Pluton essentially aims to bring the robust, updatable, chip-to-cloud security architecture found in Xbox consoles and Azure Sphere IoT devices directly into Windows PCs. It's designed to be tightly integrated with the Windows OS. Finally, just to be complete, for virtualized environments, we have virtual TPMs or VTPMs.
Virtual TPMs for virtual machines.
Exactly. These are software emulations of a TPM provided by a hypervisor, like Hyper-V or VMware ESXi, to secure individual virtual machines. A VTPM offers the same standard TPM 2.0 command set as a physical TPM, but it provides this functionality on a per VM basis using the hypervisor's capabilities to protect the VTPM state. They're incredibly useful for development, testing, and even for bringing some hardware-backed security features like BitLocker or Credential Guard to VMs in production. However, their security ultimately relies on the integrity and security of the underlying hypervisor itself. They are generally not recommended as a replacement for a physical TPM in scenarios requiring the absolute highest level of assurance against attacks targeting the host OS or hypervisor. And definitely don't confuse these with a software TPM, which is just a pure software emulator running in user space with no real hardware protection. Those are highly vulnerable and only useful for basic development testing.
Okay, it's clear there's a whole spectrum of implementations, each tailored to different needs and threat models, from the super robust discrete chips to the integrated Pluton and the flexible VTPMs. But beyond the technicalities, let's talk about their actual impact. How are TPMs being used out there in the real world, from securing, my personal laptop to protecting vast cloud infrastructures and maybe even tiny little IoT devices?
Oh, their applications are incredibly broad now
Yeah.
and frankly becoming indispensable across nearly every facet of our digital lives. One of the most visible applications for many of us is definitely full disk encryption.
Like BitLocker.
Exactly, exemplified by BitLocker on Windows, but also things like LUKS on Linux or FileVault on macOS, which uses a related secure enclave. Here, the TPM securely stores the encryption keys needed to unlock your entire hard drive or SSD. And crucially, as we discussed with key sealing, these keys are typically sealed to the platform configuration registers, the PCRs.
Right, tied to the boot state.
Precisely. This means if the boot process is tampered with, say, a malicious bootloader gets installed, or someone tries to boot a different OS to bypass security, or the system firmware is altered, the PCR values will change. The TPM detects this integrity breach and flat out refuses to release the encryption key. This makes your data virtually inaccessible if your device is lost or stolen. It really turns a potentially disastrous data breach into, well, mostly just the inconvenience of losing the hardware. A study I saw from 2022 found that devices using TPM-backed BitLocker had something like a 95% success rate in preventing data exfiltration attempts during simulated theft scenarios. That's huge.
Wow. So basically, if my laptop goes missing from a coffee shop, I don't have to have a complete meltdown about all my data falling into the wrong hands. That alone is a huge relief. What about securing our everyday logins? You mentioned moving beyond passwords earlier.
Yes, that brings us to secure authentication, another area where TPMs are playing a starring role, specifically with things like Windows Hello and the emerging cross-platform standard of passkeys. With Windows Hello, the TPM securely stores your biometric data like the mathematical representation of your facial scan or fingerprint template, or it securely protects your PIN, enabling fast, easy, passwordless login.
And it protects against guessing the PIN.
Absolutely. The TPM's built-in anti-hammering protection mechanism is key here. It specifically prevents brute force attacks on PINs by introducing delays or temporarily locking out login attempts after a certain number of consecutive failures, making it incredibly impractical to guess even a simple PIN. Now, for passkeys, which are based on the FIDO standard, the TPM is even more central. When you create a passkey for a website or app, the TPM generates and securely stores the private key portion of the public-private key pair used for authentication. This private key never leaves the TPM.
Never leaves. That sounds revolutionary for fighting phishing.
It is. It effectively eliminates traditional phishing threats. Because even if you're tricked into visiting a fake login page that looks identical to the real one, your TPM simply won't release or use the private key to authenticate to an unauthorized site or domain. The browser and TPM work together to ensure the key is only used for the legitimate site it was created for.
Just think about that. Potentially no more passwords to remember or reuse, and virtually no way for someone to phish your login credentials for sites using passkeys. The TPM really makes this next generation of login security a practical reality. That's fantastic for individual users, but what about the bigger picture? Enterprise networks, cloud environments?
For enterprise and cloud security, especially in the context of modern zero-trust architectures, TPMs are absolutely indispensable. We talked about remote attestation earlier, that ability for a device to cryptographically prove its identity and integrity. This is critical for organizations needing to verify the health and trustworthiness of any device, whether it's an employee's laptop connecting from home, a server in their data center, or a virtual machine in the cloud before granting it access to corporate networks, sensitive VPNs, or critical cloud services.
Zero trust. Trust nothing. Verify everything.
Exactly. In a zero-trust model, devices can't just be trusted because they're inside the network perimeter anymore. They must continuously prove their identity and integrity, and the TPM provides that unforgeable, hardware-backed cryptographic proof. A NIST report from just this year, 2024, explicitly emphasizes that TPMs are a critical enabler for zero-trust architectures by providing provable hardware assurance for device identity and security posture. It fundamentally shifts security from trusting network location to continuously verifying the device itself.
So it's really about trusting nothing initially and always verifying. And the TPM is the key mechanism for that hardware-level verification. It sounds like TPMs are truly becoming ubiquitous. Are they even making their way into the Internet of Things? All those connected devices?
Absolutely, yes. The TPM's compact size, low power consumption, and robust security features make it increasingly ideal for IoT security. It's being used to secure a vast and growing array of devices, from industrial edge gateways managing factory floors and connected cars communicating with infrastructure, to medical devices handling sensitive patient data, and even some higher-end smart home hubs. In these IoT scenarios where devices might be physically exposed or deployed in hostile environments, the TPM ensures device integrity, provides secure key storage for encrypted communications, and offers resistance to tampering, often for devices that have limited processing power for complex software security.
Can you give a concrete example of that?
Sure, there's a really good case study involving Wellotech, an industrial IoT provider based in Germany. Around 2023, they integrated TPM 2.0 chips into their ruggedized edge gateways deployed in a smart factory environment. The TPM was used to prevent unauthorized firmware updates from being loaded onto the gateways. It secured sensor data locally using keys stored in the TPM before transmitting it. And it enabled remote attestation so the central management system could continuously verify the gateway's integrity. The result: they reported an impressive 99.9% operational uptime for their factory systems relying on these gateways, 0 reported security breaches traced back to the gateways, and verifiable data integrity flowing from the production line all the way to the cloud analytics platform. It's a powerful demonstration of how a TPM can directly translate into operational reliability, trust, and security in critical infrastructure.
That's a fantastic real-world example, showing it's not just about security in the abstract, but about tangible business value and operational trust. Now, I've also heard, maybe surprisingly, that TPMs play a role in digital rights management, or DRM. That seems like a bit of a different kind of application.
They do, and it really highlights the versatility of having a hardware root of trust available on the platform. TPMs can be effectively used to enforce DRM schemes by securely storing the decryption keys needed to play protected content, and, crucially, by verifying the integrity of the media player application itself.
So making sure the player hasn't been hacked to copy the movie.
Exactly. It helps prevent unauthorized access to copyrighted content like movies, music, or software. For instance, a major streaming service provider utilized TPM attestation features on Windows 10 and 11 PCs. The TPM stored the sensitive DRM keys and verified that their proprietary media player application hadn't been tampered with before releasing those keys to decrypt the high-definition stream. They found this significantly reduced piracy attempts compared to older, purely software-based DRM solutions because the keys were only released to untampered applications running on trusted, measured hardware. It protects high-value content like 4K streaming much more effectively. Beyond entertainment, TPMs also significantly aid organizations in meeting strict regulatory compliance requirements.
Oh, like GDPR or IFRS.
Precisely. Industries like finance, healthcare, government, and defense face incredibly stringent data security regulations, GDPR in Europe, HEPA for health information in the US, various national security directives. TPMs help organizations meet these demanding standards by providing robust hardware-based security for data encryption, like BitLocker for data at rest, secure authentication, like Windows Hello, and integrity verification via measured boot and attestation. These hardware-backed capabilities are often much easier to audit and prove compliance with than purely software-based controls. Even the NSA, the U.S. National Security Agency, issued guidance just this year, 2024, recommending the use of TPMs to harden critical Department of Defense infrastructure, specifically focusing on leveraging secure boot and remote attestation capabilities. Their analysis estimated this could reduce successful boot-level attacks by something like 40%. It clearly demonstrates how TPMs are now viewed as a cornerstone technology for meeting the highest government and industry security standards.
Okay, we spent a lot of time talking about how incredibly secure and robust TPMs are, and for good reason. But let's be realistic here. No system, no technology is ever truly 100% perfect or unbreachable. Before we maybe dive into some of the potential weaknesses, could you just briefly recap why TPM security is considered so exceptionally strong in the first place? What are those core strengths?
Absolutely. Its unparalleled robustness really stems from several core design principles working together. First, and perhaps foremost, is hardware isolation and tamper resistance. As we've said, TPMs are typically discrete physical chips inherently isolated from the main system CPU and memory. They are meticulously engineered to resist both logical attacks trying to trick them and physical attacks trying to probe them. They often include sensors that can detect attempts at physical tampering like changes in voltage, temperature, or light. And in extreme cases, they're designed to actively destroy the sensitive keys stored inside if such tampering is detected. This makes them orders of magnitude harder to compromise than any software-only security solution.
Right, that physical barrier is key.
Definitely. Second, their reliance on unique keys and secure boot integration. Each TPM has that unique, unforgeable endorsement key, EK, burned in at the factory, providing an undeniable hardware identity. When this identity is combined with platform features like Secure Boot, which verifies the digital signatures of firmware and bootloaders, it ensures that only trusted, cryptographically signed software can run from the earliest boot stages, establishing that verifiable, unbroken chain of trust we discussed. Third, their standardized and tested design. TPMs aren't just random designs. They adhere to strict, openly published standards developed by the Trusted Computing Group, TCG. And critically, the current standard, TPM 2.0, leverages widely scrutinized, robust cryptographic algorithms like SHA 256, AES, and ECC, which are constantly evaluated by the global cryptographic community. This open standardization and reliance on proven crypto is crucial. Fourth, there's the deep integration with operating systems. This isn't some add-on security gadget. TPM security features are built directly into the core of modern operating systems like Windows and Linux, ensuring seamless and effective protection for things like login, encryption, and attestation. And finally, the practical effectiveness is undeniable. That NIST study from 2023, for example, found that devices properly utilizing TPMs, especially when combined with features like Secure Boot, were significantly less likely, statistically significantly, to be compromised by boot-level attacks compared to devices without these protections. The real-world data backs up the design principles.
Okay, that's a really powerful track record, and it definitely highlights why they're considered such a critical component today. But, as you said, no system is perfect. Let's now delve into the other side of the coin, the vulnerabilities and limitations. What are the practical risks, maybe, and perhaps the more theoretical ones that we should be aware of?
Right, because it's important to have a balanced view. While incredibly robust, TPMs do have both theoretical and some practical vulnerabilities, although exploiting them often requires extreme resources or specific conditions. The first category involves direct physical attack.
Like actually breaking into the chip.
Exactly. While incredibly difficult and astronomically expensive, highly skilled adversaries with access to specialized laboratory equipment, we're talking things like focused ion beams, electron microscopes, chemical etching stations, or even laser cutters, could theoretically extract data directly from the silicon chip itself by physically delayering it and probing internal connections. A research paper back in 2020, for instance, demonstrated such a theoretical attack, but they estimated it required millions of dollars worth of equipment, weeks or months of painstaking effort, and highly specialized expertise in semiconductor analysis.
So not something your average hacker is going to try.
Not at all. This kind of attack is typically considered within the realm of state-sponsored intelligence agencies, or perhaps very high-stakes corporate espionage targeting exceptionally valuable intellectual property. It's also worth noting that TPMs provide significant mitigation against simpler physical attacks, like cold boot attacks, where someone tries to freeze the RAM to read keys after a reset, because the TPM is designed to keep private keys isolated within the chip, not sprayed across system RAM.
Okay, so unless I've suddenly annoyed a major global superpower or stolen the secret formula for Coke, I probably don't need to worry too much about someone attacking my laptop's TPM with a laser cutter, right? Good to know I can sleep easy.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly. What about more common or maybe more practical issues, things that might actually happen?
Yeah, a far more practical and unfortunately more prevalent risk often lies not in the inherent design of the TPM chip itself, but in implementation flaws.
Flaws in how it's used or connected.
Exactly. The ultimate security of the system doesn't just depend on the TPM chip being secure in isolation. It critically depends on how well it's integrated into the wider system by the motherboard manufacturer, the firmware developers, like the BIOS-UEFI coders, and the operating system. Poorly written firmware, misconfigured secure boot settings, or maybe insecure communication channels between the main CPU and the TPM chip can inadvertently create bypasses or vulnerabilities that undermine the TPM's protections.
Can you give an example?
Sure. There was a widely publicized vulnerability discovered in 2022 affecting some Lenovo laptops. It allowed attackers, under certain conditions, to effectively disable or bypass TPM protections entirely. The flaw wasn't in the TPM chip itself, but in Lenovo's UEFI firmware implementation that interacted with the TPM. This really highlights that the entire ecosystem surrounding the TPM, the firmware, the drivers, the configuration, are all crucial links in the overall security chain. A weakness anywhere can compromise the whole.
And what about those firmware TPMs, the FTPMs that run inside the CPU? You mentioned they might be slightly less resistant. Are they inherently more vulnerable than the separate discrete chips?
Firmware TPMs, FTPMs, like Intel PDT or AMD FTPM, while still providing a very strong level of security for most use cases, are indeed generally considered slightly less resistant to certain highly sophisticated attacks compared to their discrete chip counterparts. The reason is fundamental. Because the FTPM logic runs within the trusted execution environment, TEE, of the main CPU, it shares the same piece of silicon with the general purpose processor cores.
So they're closer neighbors, digitally speaking.
Exactly. This means that a vulnerability in the CPU's TE implementation itself, or a powerful side-channel attack against the CPU, could potentially impact the FTPM. A notable example was a vulnerability discovered in AMD's FTPM implementation in 2023. Researchers found a way, under very specific and difficult conditions involving physical access and sophisticated side-channel analysis, to potentially extract cryptographic keys.
Wow.
Again, this wasn't trivial, but it demonstrated that the immense complexity of integrating a secure enclave like an FTPM within a high-performance, general-purpose processor inherently creates a larger potential attack surface compared to a dedicated, physically isolated chip designed solely for security.
That's quite intricate. What about attacks that don't involve directly breaking into the chip or finding firmware flaws, but rather subtly observing its behavior from the outside?
Now you're talking about side-channel attacks, and they are a fascinating and very active area of security research. These attacks don't try to brute force the encryption or find a software bug. Instead, they exploit indirect information leakage that occurs as a byproduct of the chip's normal physical operation during cryptographic computations.
Leaking information. How?
Several ways. One is power analysis. By measuring the chip's minute fluctuations in power consumption while it's performing cryptographic operations, like RSA signing, attackers can sometimes deduce information about the secret key being used. This can range from simple power analysis, SPA, looking at overall patterns, to differential power analysis, DPA, which uses statistical methods on many measurements. Another is timing attacks, where attackers exploit tiny variations in how long different cryptographic operations take to complete, depending on the secret key or data involved. And then there's electromagnetic EM eavesdropping, which involves measuring the faint radio waves naturally emitted by the chip as transistors switch during computation. These EM signals can also leak information about internal operations.
That sounds like something out of a spy movie. Can they really get keys this way?
Under laboratory conditions, yes, sometimes. For instance, a research study in 2021 demonstrated that some TPM implementations could indeed leak cryptographic keys via electromagnetic side channels. However, it's crucial to understand that these attacks typically require extremely close physical proximity to the chip, often millimeters, very sensitive and specialized measurement equipment, a controlled environment, and sophisticated signal processing expertise. These are definitely not trivial attacks that your average malware running on the OS could perform remotely. Modern TPMs also incorporate various hardware and software countermeasures specifically designed to mitigate these side-channel leakages.
Okay, so again, probably not a threat for my home laptop unless James Bond is really interested in my vacation photos.
Yeah, probably not. Another risk, though perhaps more theoretical in terms of widespread exploitation reported so far for TPM specifically, is supply chain attacks. This is a huge concern for all hardware and software today. The idea is that malicious code or even altered hardware components could potentially be inserted or modified somewhere during the complex global manufacturing and distribution process, either in the TPM chip fabrication itself, or during motherboard assembly, or even firmware loading.
So the chip could be compromised before it even gets to you.
That's the fear. While thankfully no major publicly confirmed incidents of widespread supply chain attacks specifically targeting TPM chips have been reported as of, say, mid-2025, it remains a persistent and critical concern for governments and high-security industries. It underscores the immense need for robust verification processes, secure development life cycles, and trusted manufacturing partners throughout the entire product life cycle. Also, just circling back quickly, it's crucial to acknowledge that using outdated TPM versions, specifically the older TPM 1.2 standard, poses a significant risk.
Why is that?
Because TPM 1.2 primarily relied on algorithms like SHA-1 for hashing and often had fixed RSA keys, SHA-1 is now considered cryptographically broken and insecure for many applications, especially digital signatures. This inherent weakness makes systems still relying solely on TPM 1.2 potentially vulnerable to certain attacks. This is precisely why the industry, pushed by requirements like Windows 11, has moved decisively to TPM 2.0 with its mandatory support for stronger algorithms like SHA-256 and its crucial algorithm agility. If you have a choice, or if you're checking your system, you absolutely want TPM 2.0.
Good to know. And I imagine even with all this amazing hardware level security, the TPM still can't protect us from ourselves, can it?
Yeah.
The human element.
No, it absolutely cannot. And this is perhaps the most important limitation to understand. Social engineering and user errors remain incredibly significant vulnerabilities, arguably still the weakest link in almost any security chain. A TPM, no matter how secure, cannot protect you if you reveal your password, fall for a convincing phishing scam, and enter your credentials on a fake site, though passkeys help here, click on a malicious link that installs malware, or grant excessive permissions to untrusted software.
So it secures the foundation, but can't stop you from accidentally inviting the burglar into the front door.
Exactly. It's a foundational component, providing that bedrock of trust and integrity measurement, but it's not a magical shield against every conceivable threat vector, especially those that exploit human psychology. This really raises an important question, or maybe a concluding thought on vulnerabilities. While the TPM provides unparalleled hardware-based security for specific functions and can reliably detect many types of breaches, particularly at the boot level, we must always remember it's just one, albeit very strong, piece of a much larger layered security puzzle. It provides the evidence of a breach, like changed PCRs, but the broader ecosystem, the operating system, security applications, network monitoring tools, and especially the user or administrator, must be capable of acting on that evidence effectively. Furthermore, the TPM has a limited scope by design. It's laser-focused on protecting specific tasks: secure key storage, platform integrity measurement during boot, secure authentication operations. It doesn't, however, inherently defend against all types of attacks. For example, it won't stop network exploits targeting your web browser, zero-day vulnerabilities in applications you use, or purely software-based malware that doesn't attempt to tamper with the boot process or steal TPM-protected keys directly. It provides the trusted foundation, but you absolutely still need strong walls, like firewalls and patch software, and a good alarm system, like endpoint detection and response, built on top of that foundation.
That's a really crucial point. It's foundational, not the entire building. Yeah. So, given these potential vulnerabilities and limitations, what are the best, most practical mitigation strategies? What can listeners do to keep their TPMs and the systems they protect as secure as realistically possible?
Right. It's about managing the risks. The most crucial mitigation strategies are often the simplest, yet sometimes the most overlooked. Firstly, and absolutely paramount, keep firmware and software updated. Regular patches and updates from your device manufacturer for BIOS and your operating system provider, like Windows Update, are essential. These updates frequently fix known vulnerabilities, including those implementation flaws we discussed, like the AMD FTPM patch from 2023, or past firmware bugs from various vendors. Don't ignore those update prompts. The TCG has even introduced standards like firmware-limited objects that allow cryptographic keys to be cryptographically bound to specific certified firmware versions, making firmware updates even more critical for security. Secondly, always use TPM 2.0. If you're buying a new device or have the option, ensure it has TPM 2.0. It's stronger, more flexible algorithms make a real difference compared to the older 1.2 standard. Thirdly, remember that the TPM is part of a system. Combine it with strong overall system security practices. That means using strong, unique passwords or passkeys, keeping your operating system and all your applications up to date, and configuring your system securely. Example, disabling unnecessary services. Fourthly, enable Secure Boot in your UEFI settings if it isn't already. Secure Boot works hand in hand with the TPM's measured boot to provide robust protection against malicious boot code. And finally, something that might seem obvious, but is critical against physical attacks. Physically secure your devices. Don't leave your laptop unattended in public places. This simple step prevents the vast majority of those sophisticated hands-on attacks that require direct physical access to the hardware. If you ever perform a major action like reinstalling your OS from scratch, it's also generally a good practice to explicitly clear your TPM keys first. There's usually an option in the BIOS CFI or within the OS like tpm.msc on Windows, just to ensure no old state remains. But be cautious doing this, as it will invalidate any existing BitLocker encryption or Windows Hello setups, requiring you to set them up again.
Okay, we spent a good deal of time focusing on TPMs in the Windows world, which makes sense, largely because of that Windows 11 mandate really bringing it to the forefront. But is the TPM restricted to just Windows? Or does it play a significant role in other operating systems like Linux and maybe other diverse computing environments as well?
That's an excellent and often misunderstood point. The TPM specification itself, as defined by the TCG, is actually completely OS agnostic. It's designed from the ground up to be independent of any particular operating system or hardware vendor. This foundational neutrality is key, and it allows for a robust and growing ecosystem on Linux and other platforms too.
So Linux users can take advantage of TPMs just as well.
Absolutely. Linux users have access to a range of sophisticated open source tools, most notably the TPM2 tools package and the TSS2 software stack, like IBM-TS or TPM2TS, which allow them to interact with and leverage TPM 2.0 features effectively. This includes things like securely storing SSH keys, where the private SSH key can be generated and sealed within the TPM itself. To use the key, you might need to authenticate locally, like with a password or fingerprint, making your SSH sessions much more resistant to key theft or phishing.
Ah, like Windows Hello, but for SSH.
Sort of, yeah. It provides that hardware-backed protection for your keys. Linux also fully supports TPM-backed full disk encryption using LUKS, Linux Unified Key Setup, often integrated with tools like Systemed Crypt Setup. This provides similar levels of data at rest protection and boot integrity checking as BitLocker does on Windows, sealing the disk encryption key against specific PCR values. In enterprise Linux server environments, TPM remote attestation is becoming increasingly critical for verifying the integrity of servers before they join a Kubernetes cluster, connect to a secure network fabric, or access sensitive data, ensuring that only known good, untampered machines are part of the trusted infrastructure.
So it really is a universal security foundation, adaptable across different operating systems. And its reach isn't just limited to personal computers either, right? You mentioned it extends to enterprise servers, cloud computing, and even those tiny IoT devices.
Exactly. The TPM's capabilities are proving vital across the entire computing spectrum. In server environments, TPMs provide critical hardware-based protection. They secure the boot process, measured boot, manage encryption keys for data at rest on server drives, and enable that crucial remote attestation within enterprise data centers or private clouds. This helps ensure that even in large, complex server farms, each individual machine starts in a known good state and can continuously prove its integrity to management systems. For cloud computing, while physical TPMs are used in the underlying host servers, cloud providers also offer virtual TPMs, VTPMs, to provide a hardware root of trust capability to individual virtual machines. A VTPM, as we discussed, relies on the hypervisor to securely emulate the TPM 2.0 interface and protect the VTPM state for each VM. This allows cloud providers like Azure, GCP, and AWS to offer their customers VMs with the same kinds of hardware-backed security features like shielded VMs, measured boot reports for VMs, and BitLocker within the VM, mimicking the functionality of a physical TPM for virtualized workloads. And yes, as we've touched on, its small physical footprint, low power consumption, and robust security features make the TPM increasingly ideal for securing a vast range of IoT devices. Think connected cars needing to securely authenticate to charging stations, medical devices needing to ensure firmware integrity, or smart factory equipment needing tamper-proof storage for sensor calibration data. In these often physically exposed or resource-constrained environments, the TPM provides that essential anchor for device integrity, secure key storage, and resistance to tampering.
Okay, looking ahead now, what's on the horizon for trusted computing and the TPM specifically? Are there major new challenges emerging or maybe exciting new integrations coming as technology continues its relentless march forward?
Well, the overall market trends are unequivocally pointing towards robust, continued growth for TPM adoption worldwide. This is being driven by several factors acting together. The unfortunate but undeniable exponential increase in sophisticated cyber attacks, particularly ransomware and firmware attacks, ever more stringent data privacy and security regulations like GDPR and HIPAA demanding stronger protections, the pervasive expansion of cloud computing, remote workforces, and the sheer explosion of IoT devices, and even the rollout of high-speed 5G networks enabling more complex edge computing scenarios that require strong security. All these trends point towards needing more trust anchored in hardware. But the biggest challenge, and perhaps the most significant opportunity on the horizon, without a doubt, is post-quantum cryptography, or PQC.
Ah, the quantum threat. We hear a lot about that.
We do, and for good reason. The eventual advent of sufficiently large and stable quantum computers poses a significant, arguably existential threat to all the current asymmetric cryptographic algorithms we rely on today, specifically RSA and elliptic curve cryptography, ECC. These are foundational to pretty much all modern digital security systems, including how TPMs generate and secure keys for things like digital signatures and key exchange.
So this raises that important, almost terrifying question again. What happens when quantum computers can break today's encryption, maybe in minutes or hours instead of millennia? Is the TPM, or frankly any of our current security infrastructure, ready for that day?
It's a critical concern, absolutely, but this is precisely where the TPM's algorithm agility, a core design principle of TPM 2.0, becomes its secret weapon and a huge potential advantage. That agility means the TPM isn't hard-coded to only use RSA or ECC forever. It's designed to be able to load and use new cryptographic algorithms as they become available and standardized.
So we can learn new crypto tricks.
Essentially, yes. It allows the TPM framework to adapt and incorporate new quantum-resistant algorithms, often based on different mathematical problems like lattice-based cryptography, hash-based signatures, or multivariate cryptography. As these PQC algorithms emerge and are formally standardized by organizations like NIST, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology. The Trusted Computing Group, TCG, is already actively working on new specifications and guidance for integrating these quantum-safe algorithms into future TPM profiles and potentially future hardware revisions. NIST has already announced its initial set of choices for PQC algorithms meant for standardization, like Crystal's Kyber for key encapsulation and Crystal's dilithium for digital signatures. The TPM's modular design, especially in firmware TPMs or future discrete chips, means it can be updated to support these new primitives, providing a continued hardware-backed foundation for security even in the quantum era. This proactive approach is vital to ensure the TPM can remain a trusted anchor well into the future.
That's reassuring that there's a path forward. What about beyond quantum? Are there other exciting developments, maybe integrating TPMs with AI or blockchain?
Yes, definitely. We're seeing some really interesting potential in next-generation security integration. For instance, TPMs could integrate more closely with AI and machine learning (AML) systems. Imagine vast streams of TPM-attested integrity measurements, those PCR values, flowing from millions of devices into a central AML security analytics platform.
Like a giant health monitoring system for devices.
Kind of, yeah. This could allow the AI to perform sophisticated anomaly detection, identifying subtle, previously unseen deviations in system behavior across the fleet that might indicate novel zero-day attacks or advanced persistent threats that wouldn't be caught by traditional signature-based detection methods. The TPM provides the trusted, unforgeable data source, and the AI provides the pattern recognition at scale. And then there's blockchain and distributed ledger technologies. TPMs could significantly enhance the integrity, security, and trustworthiness of blockchain transactions and smart contracts.
How would that work?
By providing a hardware root of trust for the cryptographic keys used to sign blockchain transactions. A TPM can ensure that a user's private key is generated securely, stored securely, and used for signing only with proper authorization, all within a tamper-resistant hardware environment. This adds a much stronger layer of assurance against key theft or fraudulent transactions compared to storing keys purely in software wallets. This could be crucial for applications like secure supply chain management, where you need verifiable proof of origin and transfer for goods, or for securing digital identity platforms, managing high-value digital assets, or executing sensitive smart contracts, adding an immutable hardware-backed layer of trust to the already strong cryptographic foundations of blockchain.
Okay, so after this truly deep dive into the world of TPMs, you, our listener, might be sitting there wondering about your own device. Do you actually need a TPM? Or maybe do you even have one already and just didn't know it?
That's the practical question, right? And the answer is, if you're using any reasonably modern PC today, bought in the last, say, 5, 7 years, and especially if it's running Windows 11, then you very likely already have a TPM 2.0 compatible module. It might be a discrete chip on the motherboard, but more commonly these days, it's probably a firmware TPM built into your Intel as PTT or AMD as FTPM processor.
So most people probably have one, but do they need?
Well, you absolutely need it functionally if you want to install or run Windows 11 officially. But beyond that requirement, you definitely benefit from it and arguably need it from a security perspective if you use features like BitLocker for encrypting your hard drive, or Windows Hello for convenient and secure passwordless login, or if you rely on Secure Boot to protect your system from malicious bootloaders. If you work in a corporate or government environment that requires device health attestation before letting you connect to the network or access sensitive resources, then it's not just beneficial, it's often mandatory. And honestly, even if none of those specific features are your top priority, if you simply want the best available protection for your sensitive personal data against physical theft or tampering, then yes, having an enabled TPM 2.0 is an indispensable component for your digital peace of mind today. If you happen to be building a customer PC, you might need to double check. Most modern consumer motherboards now integrate FTPM functionality that works with compatible CPUs, but some might require you to purchase and install a small, separate TPM module that plugs into a header on the motherboard, though that's becoming less common.
Okay, that makes sense. And how can someone easily check if they have a TPM on their own device and, importantly, if it's the right version, like 2.0?
On Windows, it's actually quite simple. The easiest way is to press the Windows key plus R simultaneously on your keyboard. This opens the Run dialog box. In that box, just type tpm.msc, that's tp.ms.m.c, and press Enter or click OK.
TPM.msc.
Got it. Right. The TPM Management Console window should pop up. It will tell you pretty clearly if a TPM is found, whether it's ready for use, the TPM is ready for use, and crucially, under the TPM Manufacturer Information section, it will show the specification version. You really want to see 2.0 there. If it says 1.2, your system is older and won't meet Windows 11 requirements and lacks the security benefits of 2.0. If the console says compatible TPM cannot be found, then it's either missing or disabled. On Linux, you can typically use command line tools. Installing the TPM2 tools package is common, and then you can run commands like tpm2 getcat properties fix to probe for TPM 2.0 support and check its status.
What if you run tpm.msc and discover you have one, but maybe it says it's not ready, or you suspect it's disabled in the BIOS? Can you just turn it on?
Yes, usually you can. If your device physically has a TPM, either discrete or firmware-based, but it's disassembled, you can almost always enable it through your computer's BIOS or UEFI settings menu. How you get into that menu varies by manufacturer, but it usually involves pressing a specific key repeatedly right after you power on the computer. Common keys are F2, F10, delete, or escape.
The key lottery during boot up.
Hey, exactly. Once you're inside the BIOS UEFI setup menu, you'll need to look for settings related to security. They might be under a main security tab, or sometimes under advanced or trusted computing. You're looking for options that might be labeled explicitly as TPM security, TPM device, or perhaps Intel PTT, Platform Trust Technology, or AMD FTPM. You'll want to make sure that option is set to enabled or available. The exact steps and menu names can vary quite a bit between manufacturers, like Dell, HP, Lenovo, Asus, etc., and even different motherboard models, so if you're unsure, the best bet is always to consult your specific device's manual or the manufacturer's support website for precise instructions. After enabling it, make sure to save the changes and exit the BIOS UEFI, and your computer will restart. Then you can check tpm.msc again.
Good advice, check the manual. And finally, wrapping this up, what are the key best practices listeners should follow to really maximize their TPM security and ensure it's doing its job as effectively as possible?
Yeah, it really boils down to a few key actionable steps that reinforce everything we've discussed. First, as we just emphasized, keep your system firmware, BIOS UEFI, and your operating system fully updated with the latest security patches. This is absolutely crucial for fixing any known vulnerabilities in the TPM's integration or its associated software stack. Ignore updates at your peril. Second, remember the TPM is part of a larger system. Use strong passwords, or better yet, passkeys, and maintain secure configurations across your entire system. Basic digital hygiene is still essential. Third, make sure Secure Boot is enabled in your UEFI settings. It works synergistically with the TPM's measured boot to provide a much more robust defense against malicious code trying to load early in the boot process. Fourth, again, physically secure your devices. This simple precaution prevents the vast majority of those sophisticated physical or side-channel attacks that require direct, hands-on access to the hardware. Don't make it easy for attackers. And finally, a point of caution. If you ever need to reinstall your OS from scratch, or perhaps transfer ownership of a device, it's generally a good security practice to explicitly clear your TPM keys first. There's usually an option for this within the BIOS Wi-Fi setup, or sometimes within the OS management tools like tpm.msc, clear TPM option. However, be absolutely aware that doing this is destructive. It will permanently erase all keys stored in the TPM, meaning any BitLocker encrypted drives will become inaccessible unless you have your separate recovery key backed up, and you'll need to re-enroll Windows Hello Biometrics, or PNs, and regenerate any other TPM-protected credentials. So use that clear function with understanding and only when necessary, making sure you have backups of critical recovery keys. Hashtag outro.
So that's our deep dive into the Trusted Platform module, this silent, often unseen, but as we've learned, utterly indispensable guardian, embedded deep within your devices. It's working tirelessly behind the scenes 24/7, protecting your most sensitive encryption keys, verifying your system's integrity from the very moment it powers on, and enabling those convenient and secure trusted operations like passwordless logins. It's truly become a cornerstone of modern computing security, making your digital life inherently safer in an increasingly complex and, let's face it, often hostile threat landscape.
And while the TPM provides an incredibly robust, truly hardware-backed foundation for establishing trust in our devices, I think our discussion today really highlights a crucial, overarching truth. Security is always about layered defense. The TPM is a formidable shield, perhaps the strongest shield we have at the base hardware level, but it's still just one essential component in a much larger strategy. It really asks us, as users and IT professionals, to constantly consider, are we doing enough to protect every layer of our digital lives, from the immutable hardware secured by the TPM all the way up through the operating system, the applications, the network, and ultimately right up to our own human vigilance against things like phishing and social engineering? Maybe take a moment today after listening to check your own devices for a TPM using that tpm.msc command. See if it's enabled. See if it's version 2.0. Enable those features like BitLocker or Windows Hello if you haven't already. And just reflect for a minute on how this powerful yet often unseen technology impacts your personal and professional digital security every single day. It might just change how you think about trust, verification, and security in the digital world we all inhabit.